Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all, and welcome to the program, another edition of Iran versus the Epstein Empire, or Axis of Resistance versus Axis of Empire. It's the 20th edition. It's a late night edition. I hope many of you have fueled with coffee, or even better, had a siesta. This afternoon. That's the way you should do it. This is White Hawk Down. We'll talk a little bit more about the title and the story or non-story or fabricated story or whatever it is that has helped create the conditions for U.S. Renewal of aggressive hostilities and military action against Iran, and all of those other updates in this collaborative live stream program with Resistance is Fertile podcast. And of course, as ever, we have our co-hosts from Resistance is Fertile. Benji, it's great to see you at this late hour. It's good to see you, Benji.
Great to see you guys, yes.
Great. And it's also, we have Indi here, as usual, at a more reasonable hour for him. So this
yes. Thank you for accommodating me. I was able to drop off my kids.
Yeah, so now you're free and clear. So I'm expecting Indi unrestrained and unrestricted now.
But I've also been offline for an hour, so let's see. I don't know if things still exist.
Well, they still exist, but there's always developments. But since we're not a news show, like having to report, we're an analysis and anti-imperialist analysis, anti-imperialist solidarity and community. And joining our community today, special guest, friend of the show, returning guest to this series, is Matteo Capasso, who is, as you all know, a professor of Middle East Studies in China. He's an editor of Middle East Critique, a wonderful journal that you should follow. And often, I don't think 100% of its articles are, free, but many are. And so you should definitely check it out. And he's also author of Everyday Politics in the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. Matteo, it's wonderful to have you back on, comrade.
Very nice to join all of you. And I know it's more challenging for you today, but it's not for me, which is good.
That's good. Yeah. We're going to rely on the power from Indi and you. So it's also great to have everybody here. And before we get started with the first topic and opening remarks, I just want to remind you to like the stream, share it on your social media. You can subscribe to this channel and also at Indications, which is the home for Resistance is Fertile on YouTube, and also subscribe to Resistance is Fertile podcast.substack.com. And also, just as a reminder again, that we try and do fundraisers for Gaza, and we've been doing this month special fundraiser for Dahnun Mutual Aid in Gaza, providing fresh potable water and also cash support to families in Gaza. I've put the link in the stream, and I'll remind you a couple times. Please be generous, and let's see if we can help them. And remember that the genocide is not ended in Gaza, and the least we can do is to donate, as Justin Poder reminds us, until it hurts. So let's do that. Okay, so in terms of what's been happening, of course, on Monday, there were reports circulated about a U.S. Apache, not a Black Hawk, unfortunately, it was an Apache, but and they have this annoying habit of naming many of their military, especially I think helicopters, but many other military pieces of equipment after indigenous peoples who were eradicated in a genocide.
Missiles, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, Tomahawk, Apache.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah.
Yeah, if they survive this, they'll have like a Qassam missile at some point.
That's right. Well,
Copter, yeah.
Well, I don't know. There might be a very different kind of resonance to that. It may not be appropriatable. We'll see. But so that the downing of this Apache helicopter, which Iran does not claim responsibility for, and as we know, they're usually fairly precise and reliable about showing documentation for their attacks. So in cloud.
Adnan, is it me? I can't hear him.
Yeah, Adnan, your audio got a bit soupy, but I think you were saying so there's supposedly a downing of a not a Black Hawk, you said Apache helicopter. I think the latest story I got out, which I don't know if it sounds insane, but apparently they're saying that a drone got in the cabin and kind of sat down next to the pilots, and then the pilots kind of took it down, but then they didn't, and then
it's another one of these Hollywood type scenarios where heroically, facing adversity, and something very improbable and cinematic, like with a drone that lodged itself between the two pilots, and that it was getting very hot and like it was maybe about to explode, and somehow they managed to escape this terrible fate with minor injuries. So
yeah, but they weren't throwing like a Nerf football in there to get lodged. Like a drone traditionally wouldn't sort of just get stuck between two seats. I think this is like that pilot that they supposedly lost in the mountains. It's just
very similar.
They don't have their best script writers on the job anymore, I think.
Well, they're busy with the previous one because apparently that is already going to be made into a Hollywood movie. So apparently there are going to be a lot of movies generated from the heroic exploits of the U.S. military. I'm looking forward very much to Sheets in the Toilets. That's going to be a blockbuster. That's going to be the one I will go watch. Yeah. So anyway, what do you think about this and about the resumption here and the use of that as an alibi for resuming much more aggressive attacks, which had already begun, of course, and never really ended, despite the so-called cessation.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think there was wasn't it also the International Atomic Energy Agency that released the letter a few days ago on the 7th of June, which I think it's part of all this concerted effort to continue and to find excuses to basically resume the bombing. Another letter of those that basically said that Iran needed to allow the inspection of those very sites that had been bombed in the last round. Both in the 12-day war and now in the 12-day war, I think they were bombed. Yeah, which made them really impossible logistically and legally and everything. Actually not impossible. It required them to be safeguarded, basically not allowing inspection precisely because of the bombing. But anyway, these are all pretexts that we all know the United States and Israel are using to resume the bombing. It's been a tit for tat. I mean, in the sense that the ceasefire now, I think we are 5 weeks, 7, something like this. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but it's never been a full quiet ceasefire in the sense, they haven't been, the United States have stopped bombing or literally firing at each other. On the contrary, they used the firing to submit Iran to the table of negotiation, which of course it didn't work. What it was interesting this time though, and in the last time, especially when Iran decided to intervene in support of Lebanon, even in response to the popular support of the Iranian people, that they went down in the streets wanting to see the Iranian military supporting Hezbollah and supporting the Lebanese people in this war. So in response to that, I thought that that was already, because, every time you're going to bomb Israel, considering the savagery in which this Zionist entity is at this point in history, that was going already to open a sort of a Pandora box, and it was going to resume everything. But then it turned out to be a quick exchange of fire. Now I am surprised in a way because it appears that so the United States have come up with this excuse, which we know is a perfect excuse. But now they're bombing water infrastructure in the south of Iran, which that doesn't make sense, of course. And the Iranians, we know, I think I was looking at this right before we started, we know that the missiles are going over Jordan. So the conflict is expanding, and most importantly, as we know, the big measure today, today for me, is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which has been announced all over again. Had this looked like, in principles, as escalations that are going to resume a more steady exchange of fire, potentially. At the same time, I wouldn't be honestly surprised if another Trump tweet statement is going to come up saying, oh, we are very close to making a deal, then, we're just going to have a pause. And again, I have a feeling that what we are seeing is a show of strength, a show of force, which has to be translated at some point into some gains on the negotiating table. I don't think this is going to happen. The United States, of course, want this. The Iranians are being very firm. What I wonder, and I send the question back to you, is whether the United States are ready to enter a war which is of a long, kind of deteriorating the internal conditions and keeping Iran into this kind of tension for a long time. We've seen he hasn't worked with Russia, but of course, this kind of resuming constantly, being constantly at fight and war can be also one of the strategies that potentially the United States might be looking at. Another issue that I've been talking with some other people is, do the United States want a war while the World Cup is about to start? Maybe not, but I don't think that at this point the United States cares about his image anymore. There's nothing to care in the first place, but anyway.
That's a great point, and we discussed that in our World Cup special preview show with Guerrilla History and Indi and Abu Bakr Abid, Alex Avinia, and Alex Avinia made, I think, the important point. Perhaps he repeated it on today's stream on the Anti-Imperialist Collective's preview of the World Cup, that the United States seems to be completely unconcerned, and in fact, maybe even attempting to destroy its soft power. Like, it's no longer interested in its soft power. It wants to present a different image to the world. And so some of the kinds of diplomatic questions that we would raise about the timing of the World Cup, where the world is watching the United States and the World Cup, is that a opportune time for resuming these hostilities? I don't think it matters in their calculations at all, because they obviously don't care about the World Cup. They've already ruined and destroyed any positive imagery that they might have had, with their behavior towards the teams and Iran and so on. So I don't know if that's a real concern, but that's an interesting point and an interesting question. But gentlemen, other thoughts and responses to the points Matteo has raised here about we've been calling it a war of attrition for a while, and expecting that it would be a long-term conflict, simply because the United States is incapable of negotiating. It clearly doesn't have the capacity to make firm commitments, because it is on the horns of this dilemma that it has pressures internally, its relationship with the strategic objectives of Israel, that has absolutely no interest in an agreement that would allow Iran to consolidate its geostrategic and political and military gains, but in fact rather wants to impel the United States, even as it's a declining force, to push it to do the work that Israel wants, to remove any challengers in the region. So even though it can't and doesn't want, and it's clear that Trump doesn't want to be pushed into further open, direct, intense hostilities, this degrading, slow attrition, attacking and being able to try and exploit opportunities for hybrid war, stifling the economic conditions for Iran. These are things that they might be more comfortable with. But this open, direct confrontation, it didn't go well in the 40-day war. And I don't think there's really that much appetite for it, politically in the United States. Look at the main victory in the primary by, somebody with a kind of different configuration and constellation of interest. Anti-war, somebody with a military background.
Yeah, he's an anti-war war criminal, but yes.
Yeah, an anti-war war criminal. Like, this is what is allowable. It's only the war criminals who can be anti-war in the American political sphere, right? Because they have the credibility. I killed and brutalized and massacred and genocided, but I'm telling you, it's not the right thing. We shouldn't do it. It's not good for us. So that's who they will believe in the American population about these things. But at the same time, he doesn't fall into the usual kind of left orientation on cultural issues, but has made some kind of coalition that is actually dragging on the right, like the right's kind of position in a way. So that's interesting to see that happening within. That's portentous, it seems to me, is that if that's happening successfully within a Democratic primary, that's a different kind of configuration and an additional pressure undermining, U.S. War kind of solidarity. But what else do you think, Indi?
So if we're talking about a war of attrition, you need to look at what each side has to attrit. So Iran is sitting on land, and it has a plentiful supply of missiles, which are homegrown, and it has energy supplies, and it has food, and it produces a lot of what it needs due to largely the pressure of sanctions, but largely their own ingenuity. And their IRGC generals have said they're ready for a 20-year war. They've said they're ready. And as you saw in their war with Iraq, even when they weren't ready at the time, they were able to handle that. And politically, they're cohesive. Their people have been in the streets for 101, 102 days now, protesting for the regime. So they're ready for a war of attrition. They've been preparing for that for decades, really. If you look on the white empire side, because let's just lump America and Israel and all those guys together, where are they fighting from? So their bases, their Persian Gulf bases, have been cleared. The Fifth Fleet is effectively homeless. I think Iran hit Bahrain again, but there's not much left in Bahrain. Now they're hitting Kuwait, and they're hitting Jordan, and I think Yemen is hitting Saudi. So there's an internal U.S. paper, it's called The Tyranny of Geography, and they talk about how the Gulf bases are indefensible, and they'll need to pull back to Jordan, Saudi, and Israel to a large degree. So that's kind of already happened. And their supply lines are stretched. So they're fighting from aircraft carriers, which some of them should have been decommissioned already. They're struggling with the toilets. They're using refueling planes. They have to park the refueling planes somewhere. They're stretched out. And then economically, they're also stretched. They seem to be trying to dump the AI bubble, like they're trying to dump SpaceX on the open retail market in about 2 days. The AI guys seem to be trying to get out before that whole thing pops. And that economic pressure and the economic pressure of the closing of Hormuz is still there. They're just trying to sort of wish it away through their control of the markets, but that pressure is still there. And I mean, people from Shell and those others are saying, this reaches a critical point by about, I think, September, they say, but probably sooner. And at the same time, right now it's getting hot in the Middle East or in West Asia, and this is kind of not a good time to fight there. And it's, as Adnan, as you mentioned, it's entering, I forget what the name of the holiday is, forgive me. What's the name?
Yeah, the Muharram, Ashura, on the 10th of Muharram. But this whole 10 days of Muharram that we're just on the cusp of is extremely important.
So that further unites the population, the Shia population, at least. And as you talked about that, whatever, I don't even pay attention to U.S. elections anymore, but like there, you can see that they're divided there. And it's going to take a while for that election to kick in, but taking AIPAC money is toxic now. Supporting this war is toxic now. This is, I think, I forget who, maybe Semler or someone, or Johnson. There's some guy who reported that this is the first war for the U.S. where it started underwater. So every war, like Vietnam, whatever, there's some support for it, and then it goes under. This war started underwater. So it's not a tenable political position for them internally. So a war of attrition, what does America's already pretty attrited? It doesn't go in their favor. But the interesting, scary thing is that what Saeed Mohammad Marandi has said is if war resumes, they will take out the Gulf states, Saudi, and Kuwait in the sense of those things won't really exist as functional nations anymore. Like he's told people to leave. So that is, and he hasn't. I mean, he's connected to the regime, or not regime. Sorry, the government. He's connected to the government, and he hasn't lied to me before. So Iran has the escalation control here, and I don't. I think America's just running on autopilot. I think they just had this on their to-do list, and their brain checked out in the 1980s, and they're just going through the motions. Benji, this is unusual. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm working on my not interrupting, on correcting my white boomer tendency, autistic tendency to jump in and interrupt everybody. And my dog
your dog
helping
is
me every time. Yeah, my dog is trying to keep me on the straight and narrow is what it is. Anyway, so Matteo, you said something quite interesting about they're not even trying to polish their image anymore. And with my partner yesterday, we were remembering the halcyon days of Oprah Winfrey show, which I never watched, but she told me there was this show where she would gift everybody at the end who was in the audience our favorite things. So those were, I don't know what, kitchen utensils, Hoovers, all those consumerist items. And that was really the kind of, the end of history moment for America. Liberalism was this utopia, and you could be a black woman and become a billionaire, and you could have a book club, and you could, try and enlighten the whole population through your new age book recommendations and still give them lots of consumer goods. And everybody could feel absolutely, beautiful and so enlightened and so advanced and so liberal and so feminist and so everything. And that particular illusion seems to have vanished without a trace. I mean, for one thing, America doesn't have any nice stuff to give anybody anymore. And if they did a program like this, you just end up giving all the nice Chinese stuff, which keeps on, every single, I don't know how many Chinese brands got banned from the US this week. I think it was 10 or 15. And it would be very hard, of course, to sell a new age feel-good ideology when we're all still in the middle of a 4K live genocide. So there's been a kind of total sea change in the way white empire presents itself and also faces its own population. And now it's like, you'll have 3 jobs and supposed to be happy with that, and if not, it's going to go really badly for you. So I think that's where this don't care about image comes from anymore. So you have this kind of 1936 Berlin Olympics was the tragedy, of course, and the 2026 US Soccer World Cup is the farce. And it's a very grim farce, and it's a very sad farce. But I think it says something about the absolute decline of what they used to call the soft power of empire, but was never soft, was always based on very hard genocide, on very hard regime change, on constant color revolution, on constant intervention in the affairs of every country, but violent intervention in the affairs of any country that sought any kind of sovereign path over the world system of US-led imperialism. So I think we're facing the very grim business end of genocidal imperialism in a way that, I think the prophetic book is really the accumulation of waste by our comrade and brother Ali Kadri, which kind of foretold what we're seeing today. And basically maybe because they saw Ali's book and they thought, okay, the game is up, so we might as well go full mask off. And I think this is what we're seeing. And in terms of the escalation dominance, there's, I think, as Indi says, I think it's more to do with the inner contradictions of empire, that it has financialized itself in such a way that it needs violence to impose its rule. It needs to keep its chokehold over the source of brown energy, which is really the material base of its world power and also of its financial power. So it cannot leave this region in peace. And in terms of a war of attrition, I think the same scenario is happening with Iran as happened in a different way with Russia and Ukraine, in the sense that the party that is best able to withstand a long war of attrition is very clearly Iran. I mean, I'm amongst the people who were totally surprised, and I believe we will still be surprised by the stuff that Iran is going to bring to the table in terms of actual battlefield, high-tech ordnance. I mean, they already have missile capability that no country in the world has. And that tells us that they are willing and able to carry on with this attrition very long. And I think the missile equation is absolutely central. We had on our show on Monday with you, Brother Adnan, Ehsan Safarnejad from Iran, who is a pretty sharp military analyst. And basically, the rate of repletion, I don't know, the opposite of depletion of US missiles is absolutely atrocious. Their missile manufacturing capability is all boutique little workshops, whereas Iran is able to actually replenish its stockpile regularly in a way, and their rate of depletion is much lower than that of the other side. So
Trump has summoned the defense guys to say, like, why aren't you producing more? But every time they produce a bullet, they have to like remodel somebody's kitchen.
Right. And in fairness to Comrade Trump, as they call him, Tongji Trump, as they call him in China, is actually turned to the defense industry and said, the party's over now. You had better produce real effective battlefield weapons, but they don't give a damn. They're here to maximize shareholder value, and that means financializing your thing to nothingness in the end. And you also see the hollowing out, so not just of their industrial capacity, but of their narrative warfare capacity. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic these days. You have Trump putting tweets out where he explains that he's somehow managed to get 200 ship through the Strait of Hormuz, but of course the list of their names or whatever will never be available to anybody in the world. And he repeats that it's destroyed Iran and everything.
Hey, Benji, you're talking about weapons we haven't seen. This is from our friends at Explosive Media.
Well, this is of course a reference to the story that was out about the use of dolphins, right? And it was an American allegation that Iran had created these like suicide dolphin brigades that would attack U.S. ships in the Gulf. And it sounded like it was totally crazy, but then there were actually apparently military uses of trained dolphins, not necessarily for suicide attacks, but that there were. And so I think this is a reference to that. But
you see, as you can see, these dolphins are ideologically trained. They're getting blessed
by
the Quran before they go out.
They are so confident of their weapons that they're even showing them, through our friends at Explosive Media. So that's how confident they are that this was a surprise, but they're willing to even show their hand. That's how strong they are.
And I think we should remind people that, so we've seen this movie before in that the US Navy tried to take on Yemen before, and that did not go well. And then this is an order of magnitude more difficult than subduing a place like Yemen. And if the US Navy lost.
And the British were involved as well.
Yeah, of course. So that's why we call it white empire, right? Because like, what's the difference to us on the bottom? Yeah, the British are involved. Like everybody, Europe is involved. UAE and Bahrain are still trying to be involved, but there's reports that UAE kind of flew something over to maybe kind of get their way out of this. I think Qatar is staying out of this. I think it's they're not in a good position, right? You can show that map, the Jinsa map. So this is that tyranny of geography report, which was the former head of CENTCOM produces a report for the Jewish International National Security State or something. But it shows the basing structure, and he basically says it's indefensible, and you can see it's kind of playing out just as he said. There's the basis. What they're doing is they're retreating. So I think all this stuff is just to cover a retreat, and stuff like knocking out water for 20,000 people, stuff like just assassinations, knocking over a radar mast here and there. These are not. They don't change anything in the strategic calculus. What I was thinking as I woke up today was, it's kind of getting normal to hear about Israel getting bombed, which I'm old enough to remember when that wasn't normal, when that would be unusual or even unthinkable. And now it's become normal. So Israel in its strategy always tries to normalize violence. So it tries to just normalize attacking Lebanon, normalize attacking everybody in the region. But now it's become normalized the other way, in that it's entirely normal for Israel to face consequences. And that's a kind of permanent change in the, what do they call it, security architecture of the place. Now it's an insecurity architecture for Israel. And yeah, I was just thinking that because it's become like something you don't think about, that like they face consequences, but it wasn't like that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matteo, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's several points you guys made, very important. I wanted to start from the war of attrition. I couldn't, it's we're absolutely there. I mean, there is no, and all the material elements that define this war of attrition right now. I think we absolutely have, how do you say, a correct assessment of the material forces at play that are going to define this war of attrition. So in the sense that the United States cannot defend in the ways it used to be, neither the Gulf bases, nor is financial hegemony in the Gulf in the ways in which it used to do it before. And Iran is key in this war. I mean, of course, we know that. We perfectly understand that. The issue is on this point, on the financial hegemony, is that the dollar has been, I like to think on the opposite side, what kind of damage they can still inflict to the forces and to the project that we are aiming to consolidate in the replacement of this decadent, in crisis empire and so on and so forth. I think that one of them is that certainly oil has been, there is a shift from the dollar to the commodity. If the dollar is not important anymore, we need to make sure we have a control over the oil as a commodity. So, and I think in that process, the control of Venezuela, the war against Iran, the war with Russia, on Russia, it's all part, I think, of this attempt to reconfigure the political economic conditions of monetary control, financial control by imperialism through the key axis, or simply, control of the oil reserves all over the world. It's not happening, of course, but this is part, I think, of the strategy that they have in mind, especially with Trump at this stage. I feel that AI and technology is going to become the new commodity in a way. And this war is also allowing this to happen precisely because it's becoming too expensive and it's becoming too dangerous to protect this area of the world, which is the Gulf. And by the time AI and potentially technology, as we are already seeing in the ways in which, it's becoming part of our everyday life, I think the war is on on the technological quantum AI and chips. And I think this is where we go back between the China and the United States. And the moment I think China is going to rise, that's where we're going to see a complete monetary change. But not in the sense that the renminbi is going to take over the dollar, but because the commodities being produced by China will take over eventually the entire world. So at this stage, though, oil is key. And if oil is key at this point, and we haven't reached the point where technology as a commodity has taken over, then one of the dangers that we are facing, and I think one of the comments was popping on the YouTube, on the lines here, was is a new Bandung coming through? Is it being worked on, and so on and so forth? I don't think it is, and I think this is a problem. That's the way I see it, at least. I think that we are in a stage where there is alignment, strategic alignment, tactical alignment for different reasons, but the ideological and regional blocks coming through in support of these different socio-political formations that incarnate the multipolar formation, if you want, or this new world order that we want to see, are not being defended, not at the speed at which the US is destroying or is aiming to destroy, because it's not capable of mediating anymore. It's in crisis. It just wants to destroy. It wants to make sure that the conditions set for being replaced are basically degraded to the point that this is going to delay the full crisis, the full decline and death of US imperialism. That's the way I see it. And the cumulative power of the multipolar formation, of the polycentric world, this is a debate that we can have and so on, has been cumulative, has been generational. We're talking about wars that go back to the decolonization period, the national liberation struggle. It does not have that capacity, or it hasn't shown yet that capacity as a whole I'm talking about. Of course, Iran has shown that capacity, but Iran is not enough in a way. You know, why was Venezuela and Maduro being allowed to take and being kidnapped in that manner, and the regional powers didn't step in a way that they could have done, you know? So I think we are in a moment where destruction is certainly, it's a contradiction that we're seeing, and is part of the crisis. But on the other hand, and so it's very irrational, because it just wants to kill, it wants to destroy. But there is a rational component to this destruction that has to be met by the creation of something that is going to replace this new world order. And whether we start by the replacement of the UN institutions or the construction of a new legal order, of course, war is part of this new attempt at creating a new world order. I think these are the contradictions at play that we have to juggle with. And we are going to have perhaps tension or disagreements, like, for example, saying, why wasn't Gaza part? Why shouldn't have been Gaza part of this war from the moment Al-Aqsa was launched? But not in a way that it's blaming the resistance that it didn't attack, but as a lesson of the fact that more of these progressive socio-political formations that are part of this world order are going to be attacked with this savagery. I could go on Israel as well, but we can talk about it later. But that was a good point about the fact that it's constantly being attacked. And what I wonder, though, is do the Israelis have the capacity to material and also psychological to go into this war of attrition? Of course, I don't think they do, but the less they do, the more savage they're going to turn into. So again, there is this kind of dialectic that we have to, maybe it's going to be a war where many people are going to lose their lives, but of course it's, we can't just take that part, like, how do you say, we can't just take that for granted, you know, that, losing lives has to be the cost of all this. We also want to make sure that there is an attempt to restrain the savagery. And I think the multipolar formation has shown the material weight and the capacity to do that. It has that. But can it do more in a way Sometimes this is a question that I ask myself. Oh, Iran eating Ben Gurion. Oh.
I mean, so Ben Gurion, there's refuelers parked there. It's effectively a military base now. The ironic thing is with all the bases in the Middle East, that Israel is the one place America doesn't have an official military base, but they do use Ben Gurion, as in people who fly in there put photos of KCs, KC-129s or whatever, the refuelers there. So it's being used as a base, and you can see you can put the Jinsa map up actually.
Okay.
But that shows. So I drew those arrows, but this is a report from the former CENTCOM commander, and he basically said all these bases, the red with the white in the center, he said those are indefensible, those are too close. In the case of war with Iran, this is in 2024, I think. In the case of war with Iran, we'll have to pull those back, and it shows where they pull back to. I don't think they're.
It looks like we may have lost Indi's
We
stream.
may have, yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll get him back. So go ahead, Benji.
Yeah, I think the point about trying to move to a commodity-based world order is a very good one. I think the only option they have is to try and get a stranglehold on the brown energy, and I don't think it's going to work in the West. They think it's going to work with AI. My view is I think it's different from yours, Matteo, because the way AI is used in the West is just to keep the everything bubble ever inflated. It's all about, generative artificial intelligence and trying to replace white collar workers with AI and stuff. And literally, there are papers coming out, every week that show that this simply isn't working. On the other side, China's use of AI is extremely different. Is that it's as a very highly sophisticated form of automation that can learn from what it does, but without this kind of, Promethean madness, Nietzschean madness that, you can become better than God because you are actually going to create intelligence that is more powerful than human intelligence. So I think the AI thing will not be a commodity because the AI that the West is selling is not actually useful for anything other than inflating a financial bubble that is actually on the verge of bursting. So it's, of course, very, very risky to predict the demise of capitalism. I don't want to be like what's his name, Dick Wolf, who's been predicting the end of the capitalist and the stock market for the next week for the past 10 years.
You'll be right. You'll be right at some point.
Yeah.
But so if you're talking about the AI models, you can see that people are already. If you're talking about it as a commodity, as Matteo was, people are already switching to the ones that are priced like a commodity, and not the ones that are priced like a luxury good.
Yeah, that's a good point. And on the psychological front, with the with the Zionist colony, I think the situation is a bit mixed because in a way the Zionist colony is taking very bad hits on the psychological front with the FPV drones, where they're actually now seeing their precious Chosenite soldiers being hit and jumping this and that way. And there was the operation, of course, yesterday. I think it was inside occupied Palestine itself by a lone wolf fighter who actually just walked straight through the border and I think climbed the top guard tower and then engaged the genocidal occupation forces from there. And I think those are having a very strong psychological effect on the squatter population. But at the same time, now, it's not the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog. It's really a case of a human centipede situation. And I wouldn't, get too excited about the APAC thing because it's in a large measure, it's just for show. Like now they're integrating the US Army in Turtle Island with the US Army in occupied Palestine, or the Zionist Army in Turtle Island with the Zionist Army in occupied Palestine. This is all one big monster. And I think it's conjoined in such a way that it cannot be separated anymore. And I sometimes wonder about Iran's strategy, which is to try and separate them. I mean, it's either try to separate them or to show the world that they cannot be separated. I'm more in the second camp, but that also means that they can't stop, and they will, as I said, I think every show we are witnessing suicide by Axis of Resistance. It's just a very low suicide, maybe because, those perverts, they like choking very slowly for whatever pleasure it gives them as they're doing it.
And so I just want to explain why I disappeared, which was that we had power cut here. So we kind of have like power cuts every week or so, and we still have fuel rationed here. So, but if you're talking about a war of attrition, like some people are ready for it and some people aren't. And honestly, poorer countries are kind of more ready for it than America. I think for what people call the Burger Reich, attrition would be, like losing their hamburgers or something. For someone in Iran, it has a very different meaning. And they have much more capacity and much more political will to sacrifice. If you ask an American to sacrifice anything now, they're like, for what? Because they don't support the war. And they actually have a much more fragile existence and a much more fragile society. But Matteo was talking about sort of the shift from dollars to commodity. And I think like Richard Medhurst talks about that also. It's talk about like this is idea that U.S. is trying to do what it does, which is chaosify the globe and then have control over resources. But one important point is like, what resources are important now, right? So in Sri Lanka, for example, like we've had energy crises before, and then people have been switching to batteries and solar, which China is putting out at a remarkable rate. You can see with Cuba, they're being put under massive, massive genocidal, essentially, pressure. But China is coming in and helping them with solar. So you have a different energy environment than, say, in the 1970s, when this is the only energy source. It's not that renewables, or whatever they call renewables, can replace diesel and fuel for everything human society needs, but it's not the same where you need it for absolutely everything either. And even with, like, if you talk about AI as a commodity, well, why would anyone buy the Western AI anymore? You can get the same, the productivity gains are questionable in the first place, but again, China is producing that as well. So if you look at this as like a World War II type situation, you can just call it World War III. China's kind of in the position America was then, which enabled its rise afterwards, where it's not directly involved in these wars, but as the U.S. wasn't at the beginning of World War II, but it is supplying, in this case, all sides. So these drones that you see in Ukraine and on the Russian side, they're all Chinese, so they have Chinese components. Like in China, they supply Israel as well, but then all the stuff you see from has some Chinese components. So they're like within American strategic thinking, that thinking has always been that China is the pacing threat or whatever, but China has rapidly outpaced them. So I think America's trying to hold on to, I think they're fighting a 1970s battle in 2026. So I think there is a strategy, but I think the strategy doesn't map the environment anymore. It doesn't match what's going on in terms of energy, in terms of commodities, in terms of physical geography. And I actually think that they're in a long retreat. I think that they've been in a long retreat since the 1970s. That was the last time they could field a real citizens' army, was Vietnam. Then the last time they could field a mercenary army was really Afghanistan, Iraq. And now they're depending on, it's like Hitler depending on the Romanians. Like, it's just not that reliable depending on Israeli troops, or Ukrainians are the better ones, but they're depending on Ukrainians my age, right? The average age there is like 45. They're depending on, it's like Hitler when he's kind of throwing the Romanians into the fight. It didn't work. And I think Gaza, as Benji and I have discussed, has been their Stalingrad. And the sad thing is, after Stalingrad, more people were killed, but they were on the back foot from then. So we can talk about ceasefire or not ceasefire, like they're in retreat. I think they faced a rout in the Ramadan war, and they're in retreat. And they can do some petty terrorism, they can burn some villages on the way out, but they're on the way out.
Yeah, just coming back to this, there's so many different topics have been raised, so I don't know if it's worth circling back to that question that Matteo discussed about, a second Bandung or some hope for change in the international system and whether
Well, if someone could explain Bandung in the first place, that would be helpful.
Bandung is the Afro-Asian Conference of 1955 that was held in Bandung, Indonesia, and it was 29 nations or countries represented, although some of them you could say were not yet countries. So there was, for example, at this point, there was a delegation of the FLN, that was represented and heard and had like official capacity. So anti-colonial movements were also part of it, but ultimately the main force of it was that there were, nations of the global South that had recently emerged from colonial control that were very concerned about war in the nuclear age, about continuing neocolonialism, about racism in the international system, and so it was an attempt to try and organize a third way, as it were. Even though the Soviet Union wasn't included and none of the Western countries were included, they did include China, interestingly, even though, of course, the Communist Revolution had already been successful and victorious after the Civil War there. So it put out a 10-point plan, and you can look it up. The 10 principles, and it was a very influential and significant moment in geopolitics in the world, and people began to talk about something called the Bandung spirit, or the spirit of Bandung, as a kind of ideal that might have some effect, and was sort of adopted quickly by like Nasser as a kind of anti-imperialist framework. And the very following year, when the Suez Crisis, as it is called, otherwise it's called the tripartite aggression by many of us who study the history from the Middle Eastern perspective, and that the fact that he managed to emerge from that gave even more impetus to this idea that perhaps there might be some way in which newly independent countries could develop geopolitically a kind of bloc that ultimately became the non-aligned movement, but that also perhaps there was a way to achieve collaboration and cooperation across the global South for economic development as well. And one of the things that they were most concerned about was not getting caught and trapped or forced into one of the military alliances that the United States was creating in different regions of the world, modeled on NATO. So there was SEATO, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. There was the Central Treaty Organization, also known as the Baghdad Pact. The SEATO was the Manila Pact, right? So there were these attempts to try and create military alliances that would force countries into having to choose and decide and ally themselves with the West and be a bastion for U.S. and its kind of close Western allies' military bases to ring, around the Warsaw Pact and the communist countries, right? So that's kind of what they were objecting to. They didn't want that. And it was so it was influential, and it's 1955. So when somebody refers to that, we're talking about hopes that some people had about maybe BRICS would turn from just being a kind of trade and economic organization into something that had a bit of an ideological coherence about breaking away from the suffocating, unfair capitalist structures of neoliberalism in the international system, the World Bank, etc. Would there be financing for development projects that would be freed from the strings that were attached by the IMF and the World Bank, and so on? And as Matteo was saying, right now it doesn't seem like that BRICS is really organized in such a way to fulfill that, though there are some positive developments. But I guess I would want to say about this is just that I'm a little more hopeful that there might be the opportunity for this, that what Iran is doing, even if you're absolutely correct that Iran on its own does not constitute a new system or can't put in place a new system. Many people are, kind of saying, maybe in an exaggerated way, that they're the fourth sort of superpower. I mean, I think these things you should be a little bit cautious. I don't think Iran actually intends to be any kind of superpower. That's not what they're interested in. They want to protect their sovereignty, and they want decolonization in West Asia, right? They want the U.S. out, and ultimately Israel, to cease to be the ethno-supremacist, Zionist entity. But I am a little bit hopeful that what they're doing is putting enough pressure on the imperialist global system that it is, inducing at least regional allies, for one, to reconsider their position. And you are seeing some kind of, look at Pakistan's emergence in the negotiations as being kind of central to brokering something outside of the direct U.S. system and creating some kind of connection between countries that are in the imperialist camp because they've been suborned as vassals, like Turkey as part of NATO. Egypt, of course, is not a sovereign country, but is ever since it signed the Camp David Accords, it put itself into the, kind of U.S. Alliance. But there is something emerging, it seems, in the space that Iran is creating about concern in the region, about concerns about Israel's Greater Israel Project, its aggressive war, that means that there could be something like a Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi, Egypt kind of block, or at least some cooperation in the region, and breaking and pulling it a little further out of direct U.S. empire, or forcing countries to have to make some clearer decisions about where they're going to be. And that could be healthy. That could be the seeds of something. So I don't think we should be Pollyannish about it, but there might be opportunities to emerge out of what Iran is doing that can build a different system. So that's something I just wanted to point out. I'm teaching a course soon, and I was just doing the readings, putting the readings together for the week we're doing. Bandung, the Cairo, all Asian African People Solidarity Organization that was created for the hosting of a next conference that happened, I believe, in 1961 or 60 or 61, and then of course the very famous Tricontinental. So I've been kind of thinking about that episode and those eras and what might be possible for our time. So other topics, yeah.
So it'd be nice to hear from Professor Matteo as well. But so now I know what you're talking about with the Bandung, because we talk about the non-aligned movement here, and I think that came out of that. That was a different time, right? You had Nehru, you had India and Pakistan kind of working together on something. You had, I think, Kwame Nkrumah from, and then you had Indonesia. You
had a Cold War. You had the Soviet Union.
And at that point, I think the impetus
having the Soviet Union basically in the world.
And I think that at that point, the impetus came from us. It came from like previously colonized countries. I feel like what's happening now is we're getting kicked out. As in, the World Cup is a good demonstration of that, where they're showing they're not really interested in maintaining this empire anymore. And there's nothing left for us but humiliation and rejection. I think people would have stayed with the US as just a sort of default hegemon for decades more. But they seem to be determined to kick us out this decade. And it's really testing, how much dignity, or estekbar, is that the word? Yes, how much dignity do people, or to resist their estekbar, I guess. Like, right. How much dignity do people have? It's perhaps at the time of the Bandung conference, the non-aligned movement, people had that decolonial sense. And now, especially after the 80s, at least here, people have gotten kind of settled in to the empire, and they're willing to sort of take the humiliation up to a degree, because it wasn't really that much humiliation. And in exchange for resources and access and technology and so on. But what's happening now is the resources are not coming from there, right? We're buying stuff in dollars, but nothing is produced there, and there's nothing that we're getting from them but humiliation and punishment and horror. And if the world is being realigned, but I don't think it's coming with China as a hegemon or Iran as a hegemon, it kind of returns to the norm, which what these countries are pushing for. People ask, why doesn't China do more? Why doesn't Iran do more? They're not trying to be a replacement for America. What the example they're showing is they're just trying to be independent and defend their interests. And the leadership it's showing, it's not coercive, but it is showing other countries that we need to be independent and defend our interests. And I think somebody said that every country has a Hormuz, but few countries are using them. And I mean, I think the World Cup is a good example of that. Like, they're kicking us out, so we can show some dignity and show ourselves out.
Can I? I mean, Indi made a good point. I mean, thanks for the wrapping up, Adnan. That was very useful, and also explain because I think that's what I was trying to say, is that there is a space of autonomy and reasons enough for a cohesive struggle against imperialism are emerging now. Like, we can see them, that they are being laid out, because the violence is the question of dignity, the question of humiliation. The thing is, and this is where, and also about Pakistan, we had this webinar with Radhika, the International Manifesto Group, recently, and the anti-imperialist conference, of course, in Lahore.
Yeah, and I meant to ask you, actually, Matteo, so I hope you will talk a little bit about the mood and the atmosphere in Pakistan, since you recently visited.
It was, what was important for me to realize is that the system of imperialism, the system of domination, of clobbering of the masses on a world scale, has been constructed through, of course, the co-optation and the creation of comprador elements, both from an intellectual point of view, from the level of the ruling class. Basically, you needed to make sure you have people who are going to allow a certain type of policies that in their very nature, they are about humiliation. They are about the humiliation of the people. So that's key. Now, the point is that we've been ruled by these ruling classes for a long time. I mean, to the point where it's hard to see how they are going to change their behavior, or they are going to, find to pass through this door of autonomy that is emerging through the China's model of development, or through Iran's struggle, and so on and so forth. And I think this is where I want to go back, not to the question of the people as in the multitude idea of Art and Negri up in there, but to the question of organized movement, of working class organization, that this is the time where the terrain of struggle, and this is where the Pakistan comes in, because this is what I saw, that it is important to organize the masses. This is important to organize the movement, because this is the time where I could see that when it came to Iran, when it came to the struggle for sovereignty that they are pushing forward, there was on unison, everybody was agreeing and everybody was clapping, everybody was happy, everybody was cheering for what Iran is doing in the region right now. Internally, of course, the struggle is different. There are political forces that do not want to go on a left side of the politics. They do not see the point of abandoning the liberal ideals with which they consolidated their power, but a space for leftist forces that are now occupying this the political terrain can only happen if you organize yourself. And I think this is, where we are not going to see, or I don't want to project an idea that, Pakistan is going to switch, or Turkey is going to switch, or Saudi Arabia is going to switch simply because they're seeing that this is not profitable anymore. These are humiliated ruling classes. Of course, there are opportunist elements within it that will jump from time to time from one side to the other, but this is the time for people also to organize themselves in a systematic method to push the ruling classes within their own countries to take the directions of developmental sovereignty, autonomy, and so on and so forth. And this is exactly what the Akul party in Pakistan, in Lahore, has been trying to do. And the atmosphere on that front was absolutely stunning to see also how it is possible to move beyond a sectarian vision of the left, which of course dominates the Western sphere on all fronts. And the second important element that I saw, and they explained to me as well, was how the state is now a terrain of struggle, because it needs to be the administration, the bureaucracy, the politics within the state, the control of the state now is fundamental. So the left has to combat, has to fight to enter the state, to control these institutions in order to push for a different vision of what a Pakistani state and the socio-political formation we call Pakistan can become.
Yeah, I think those are some very important points. And the first one you made, I think, is central, that there are very few really sovereign countries in the world, right? There is China, there is Iran, there is North Korea, Vietnam, maybe, and that's about it. Russia is kind of a halfway house, and that is very important because when we think about BRICS, BRICS is an assemblage of comprador elites running their countries. I think the element of humiliation is very strong. And when you are a humiliated ruler, it's not so easy to regain your dignity because it would be a kind of public admission that you didn't have it beforehand. So it's very, very difficult to move from being effectively a satrapy of neoliberal destruction of your country to a real sovereign actor. And this applies to the social democratic forces, for example, in Latin America as well, right? And so that's very important. And I think China is key to what's going on. There is, of course, the popular movements that Matteo is talking about. There are signs of those. I'm happy to hear there's a sign of that in Pakistan in a weird sort of a way, and kind of social democratic sort of way. There is also that sense of a movement in France at the moment around the Mélenchon and this kind of, with many, many limitations, but there is a real sense of people kind of going against the whole system, not just, trying to get a little bit more of this here and there. And so, that movement is possible in many places. But when it comes to China, I think it's very interesting to, think about the class struggle in China. Just because you have a socialist country, class struggle doesn't end. And to think about the strategic choices that China made, and we've had Mahoney explain them in a way that seems fairly convincing to me, that literally Mao decided that the Soviet Union was not going to survive, so China had to integrate with the imperialist world system so as to be able to develop the productive forces. And that was faced with the development of information technology at the time that was already changing the battlefield, right? And so they did. And as they did in a very smart way, in which they insisted on transfers of technology, but at the same time, by opening up, by sending lots of their elites to study abroad in the neoliberal, in the heart of the neoliberal production, ideological production apparatus in all those universities in the US and in the global north, those elites came back to China and literally spread neoliberal ideology inside China, right? And so that's a generation that's between 40 and 50 years old or something like this today in China. And then there's another, the next generation, which is the generation of one of my friends in China that I speak with twice a week. They went to study in the West, but at a time where, the Chinese strategy had worked to develop the productive forces, and they went to the West with the stories of, this land of Oprah Winfrey, where they were, everybody could do anything and you would get free stuff at the end of whatever talk you went to. And they could see already that, okay, there are some interesting things in the West in terms of material conditions, but China is catching up, and there are many things that are very valuable in China. So they kind of, China is not so bad. Many of them did go back to China, stayed there, but they're very apolitical because they're kind of, this and that. And you have the new generation, which is, very proudly represented by RIF, new co-host Amy Young, which are the folks between 20 and 30 who have actually gone to the West from developed China and literally went, what the hell is this shithole? Where are all the stories I'd heard about? And what is this? You can't even support Palestine. You can't even be against genocide. You can't even speak freely in a way that in China you can. And whenever you're able to speak, nobody ever listens to you. And when they do listen to you, it's to bang you over the head with a truncheon. And this generation is on fire. Like they want to go back to the older kind of Red Guard tradition. And I think it's not just generational, but it says something about the state of the class struggle in China. And in a way, I believe that Xi Jinping is a very able leader and a visionary because he's managing the transition in the most rational and reasonable way. And that's something that China has been very good at, changing policy without sending half of the party to the firing squad, which was the more Stalin's way. And I think that change is happening. And also I've heard, this guy, I forget his name, but he's on Pascal Lotta a lot, and he said, well, actually the Chinese leadership has been super impressed by Iran. They didn't know that Iran was able to do this. And so things are changing a little bit. And I think China is playing a very long game. It's playing a long game with Pakistan. Like you have, oil is going by train from Iran to China through Pakistan. And it's really it's very interesting because if you really want to know the state of the US and the US Army, read Trump's tweets, but change the word Iran by US. And also there's been this very long, a lot of discourse in the West that, imperialism is playing 5D chess, and a little bit the Richard Medhurst of this word, saying, it's a 5D chess. They want to put the chokehold to reduce oil capacity by 25%, and they will have the monopoly on the 75% and make everybody cry uncle. And so it's this really 5D chess to hit China. But I think actually, again, it's this accusation they're projecting, and the people who are playing the 5D chess are China. There is the meme that says, Xi is just has a cunning plan to do nothing and win, but they're not exactly doing nothing. They are doing something, and I think the image that Indi gave earlier, they're playing something that is akin to the game of the US in Second World War. So they sit on the sideline, they do business with pretty much everybody, they hold space for a different way of operating, and they've decided it would not be military and economic hegemony in the way imperialism did, nor in the way that the Soviets, in a kind of rigid sort of a way and in a kind of white supremacist sort of a way, also tried to do. And to do that, I think they're doing what we are seeing now, and they're raising the volume, little by little. Recently, they've been saying things like, now we need the rules of the UN to be really followed and all the rest of it. So I think the 5D chess comes from them. I hear, people from Iran, and they always say, oh, the Chinese are on our side, right? And why would they say it if it wasn't true? Like, I haven't heard the resistance, the AOR, ever criticized China as such. And these people don't hold their tongue. So if they don't criticize China, they must have a really good reason for it. So I'm actually super optimistic, but I'm not optimistic this will end in a week. But I'm optimistic the attrition war is on and it won't let up because the empire can't stop. And somebody said narcissists don't commit suicide. I agree with you, but it's kind of this compulsion, they can't, it's like the stupidity of white supremacy. They really can't believe that brown people are humans like them and just as smart as them. And this is what will kill them at the end of the day, psychologically, but also because of the material consequences of what they're doing.
I was interested in what you were saying, Benji, about a younger generation in China being very critical of what they see when they visit the West. But I was a little further interested, actually, in this comment about, that you can't even, I guess maybe it's about the political repression around Palestine in the West. But you made it sound as if there was a huge constituency among young Chinese people talking about the genocide in Palestine who are in solidarity with it or something like that. And that's definitely not something I have heard about. Maybe we wouldn't hear about it, but I find that interesting if that's actually the case. So,
well, according to Amy, if you go on Weibo, I think the Chinese Twitter, like she literally says, I cannot translate what they say or I'll get banned from here.
Yeah, so I use WeChat, and they have like a channel for essentially short video there, and they have their own sort of videos. And that there was that Eagle Kingdom video, which also came out of China. I think anybody who's not getting, straight line Western propaganda supports the people of Palestine. It's a fairly obvious human thing. I think it goes back to, our ape days. There used to be this thing called infant buffering, where in a fight, like an ape would hold an infant in front of them, and that would sort of stop the fight. I don't think anybody with a heart, I mean, you can go back to Meng Zi, who said anybody who saw a child inside a well would feel in their heart, the sprout of decency to care for that child. I think that's fairly common across the world. And it's also important to understand that everything that's considered, that whole sort of terrorism dialogue thing, it doesn't apply in most of the world. So Hamas and Hezbollah and all these organizations called terrorists by the West are not considered terrorists by most of the world, including in China. I was talking to someone from Britain, and then they were asking, like, well, why don't, my wife studies there, why don't we live there? I was like, well, I'm more repressed there. Where actually we're more free there. And that's a change. I grew up in America, and that's a change, perhaps not in realities, but in perception of reality. I was talking to an old friend here, but they didn't know where I'd gone to school, and I was like, oh, I went to school in America. And just, I'd say 10 years ago, the look would be like, oh, wow, that's what Sri Lankans would aspire to. Now the look on her face was just disgust. She was like, oh, like, it's not aspired to anymore. And I certainly think that, and the World Cup is a good example of that, right? There was a World Cup in '94, and then there was a sense that, come to America, visit, look around. Now it's like, we're going to, if you're a black striker for the Switzerland team, we're going to deny your visa. If you're a black referee for FIFA, we're going to reject you and say that you're a terrorist. And if you come here, we're going to price gouge you and make you walk through like parking lots. And, it's, they're shutting down shop. Just like the China Olympics was them saying, we're coming onto the world stage. Yes. I think this is America saying we're leaving the world stage.
That's right.
And I think common people perceive that.
Yeah. Well, I would remind people to go check out our discussion about the World Cup from a day or so ago. It's on this channel, and I think streamed on at Indications, as well as
we were trying to get a dispensation from Abu Bakr Abed to watch the World Cup, but he's saying
right.
People should boycott
very
it.
Firm. Yeah, he did not budge. So
We try to say, can we pirate it? And he's like, no, still boycott.
I may make a heretical exception to watch Iran's matches, but that's probably the extent of it that I might do. But just sort of rounding out this, and then maybe a couple of other topics that we might have a chance to discuss about the wider regional kind of war and regional context, is just noting again how important and significant it has been that Iran has changed its strategic doctrine now to intervene, and extend an umbrella of protection, as it had insisted would be the case at the beginning, but now to actually materially attempt to enforce that to deter Israeli aggression and attack in Lebanon, which of course they've violated subsequently, and we're seeing a lot happening in that theater, in that front as well, that resistance front, a very important one that has emerged. But I think that is strategically a really important sign of the confidence of Iran. And slowly but surely, we expect and hope to see, as that principle gets established, that it may have other consequences on other parts of the resistance fronts and the resistance axis. So we look forward to seeing how that develops. But I noted that this comprador, it's not even a comprador. I mean, I don't know how to characterize the Lebanese government that, of course, has just been imposed upon the Lebanese people.
The Lebanese Authority.
I really like that. The Lebanese Authority. They're as bad or worse than like the Palestinian Authority. But what I really found astonishing today was the levels at which they would go, in this case, of banning the importation of fiber optic cable. Okay, that they're going to try and cut off the supply of fiber optic cable in order to help Israel in its doomed and dismally failing attempts to invade southern Lebanon, right, and take that territory and hold it properly, right. That is
somebody said if Hezbollah was throwing rocks, the Lebanese Authority would try to ban rocks.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So anyway, I wondered if anybody had thoughts about what's been happening and developing in the Lebanese situation. And if anybody had any observations of the state of the resistance there. I won't say that there have been amazing developments. Apparently, it's very dangerous for me to say that they're doing amazing.
I don't know. I think Adnan, we have to look at, especially when it comes to Lebanon, the file is regional in a way, meaning that we need to bring in Syria. Because we can't understand Lebanon, without Syria. So I'm gonna push back. I want to do that. Let's see where I go. To India a little bit and the imperialism in retreat. I think it's too optimistic, according to me. And also because I'm doing this because he mentioned the World Cup in 1994. He shouldn't have done that.
I was in Syria actually studying Arabic. We were watching at 2, 1, and 3 a.m. in the morning, and of course we saw the penalties between Brazil and Italy.
To be honest, I don't remember that World Cup at all. I was in America. It's weird. I don't know.
Too late now.
Or Italian.
Okay, go for it.
The image of Roberto Baggio crying, you shouldn't have brought it up today. No, but
let's not talk about Italian football then, please.
Oh God, what a disaster! That would need another episode, by the way. How the American hedge funds have taken over the national bourgeoisie. But anyway, said that. No, what I'm trying to say, but why I wanted to connect to what he was saying and how Syria comes in, because Syria has been a setback. The fall of Syria has been a setback. So. And it came after the genocide, or with the genocide in Palestine coming. And there was a moment where we could say that by looking at the region, imperialism was definitely not in retreat. They massacred Gaza. They had completely decimated the leadership of Hezbollah. And Syria came after with the fall. And only after Syria was destroyed, Iran then became, they were confident enough to go and attack the Islamic Republic. At which point, connects to what you were saying, Adnan, this is at least my understanding, and I think we discussed this a little bit, me and you as well, was the fact that the initial nature of the war for Israel and empire was existential. By assuming a position of war by points, the Axis, in a way, entered the war in a position not of weakness, but of course they were ready to unleash their own savagery much more, and they did that. I think now the Islamic Republic has imposed a different rhythm and a different doctrine, and this is absolutely, it changes the game. We're seeing now a war of attrition that, of course, it's going to take a long time, but it shows that the Axis is in a position that it can sustain this war of attrition much more than what it looked like, especially after December 8, 2024, with the fall of the Syrian Arab Republic. The attempt there has been to redraw literally it's a war on the population, literally. It's a war on Shia. This is what we're seeing. And so there is a Lebanese authority, which is materially dependent. We have to go back to colonialism, the confessional state, the minority that are completely dependent on French colonialism, French imperialism, American colonialism. So materially, we know that this is, they are ready to embrace the idea of Zionism. They have been showing this. The working classes are not. The issue is that this is where the sectarianism wants to come in to basically destroy the Shia population inside Lebanon by using potentially the model that is being used by Jolani in Syria. And that is where I see the question of imperialism in retreat. It's more nuanced to me, because in the sense that even when it comes to Syria, we are fully aware that there is still a flow of weapons coming through Syria into Lebanon, meaning that this hasn't stopped. There are elements within Syria that are allowing a material bridge to continue to be in place for the resistance in Lebanon. At the same time, the existence of these classes, whether it's the Lebanese authorities, of ruling classes, whether it is Jolani and his gangs, whether it's Erdogan as well, in a way, that it continues to put if we do not consider them as necessarily like elements of an imperialism that is fully active, that is on the attack, if we consider them as in retreat, what is scary at the same time is that they continue to hold as a position of power that blocks this transition to a different way of conceiving humanity and reconfiguring humanity. And I think Israel is weaponizing this. We go back to, I think it was the Enon plan, 1982, this vision of the region as completely confessional and so on. And so this is where we need to see whether a project, which was, I think, for me, was the one that Hezbollah is incarnated in the Arab region, re-emerges much more consistently, because it wasn't just an Islamic resistance, it was also one that appealed to Arabism. And it is one that with the collapse of the Syrian Arab Republic, considering this organic constitution of Syria as a state with multiple confessions, not just Muslims, was very important in the Axis. With that collapse and the return of, this Sunni obscurantism funded partly by Turkey, partly by the Wahhabis, mostly Turkey and Qatar though, which interestingly, as you were saying, they seem to be sitting on the sideline. They don't want to get involved too much, at least in this war with Iran. I wonder if, we are facing the monsters showing itself up in different forms. And the confessionalism and this kind of constantly having Lebanon on the verge of the civil war, it's a sign of, maybe retreat, but maybe also extreme violence that can be further unleashed by imperialism.
Yeah, I want to agree with you, Matteo. I wouldn't say White Empire is in retreat. I think White Empire is raging against the dying of the light, and it will rage some more. And it's actually on the offensive. That's what I mean when I talk about suicide by AOR. That it cannot stop itself from attacking. With respect to Syria and Lebanon and any other place, there is a cunning plan, of course, but I don't think yes, Syria was a big blow to the axis of resistance. Yes, Syria was a big retreat or step back, but at the same time, it's not clear to me that White Empire can use Syria in the way that it might have wanted to use it. So it's almost like there's a stalemate in Syria, and we hear constantly that al-Sharaa is going to launch his hordes on Hezbollah or Lebanon or wherever, or even through Iraq on Iran, and nothing really is happening. And I take it, if nothing is happening, is because the state of play inside Syria itself doesn't really allow it. So that would be my understanding. And the same with, standard imperialist strategy, divide and conquer. So the division, the invention of those, the popping up of the Wahhabi stuff. Wahhabism is Zionism for people in the Arabic world, right? It's just a made up ideology that's there to justify genocide, which is against standard imperialist fare. But in Lebanon, that's what they try to do, but it's not working. They have not managed to dislodge Hezbollah from anything. And the popular support, I think last time it was tested was municipal elections about a year ago, but after the first ceasefire, and actually, I think the forces aligned with Hezbollah made gains in those. So it's not working, and the resistance is not disarming, and the resistance will not disarm. But the fact I totally agree with you, Matteo, the fact that nothing is working the way they want it to work doesn't mean that they will retreat. They will keep it up until they die of it. I mean, that's what I see, It's an existential struggle, but it's an existential struggle for the whole world, because we're really at the time of imperial unfolding, where it's, open genocide and ecocide, and that's it. And we're just doing this for the interest of not even the next quarter balance sheet, but literally, what we can extract from the futures market in the next 3 days or 12 hours or something. So I think you're totally right, Matteo. It's not in retreat, it's on the attack, but I don't think it's achieving any of its strategic goals.
Yes, thank you, Matteo. So there's a couple of phrases Matteo used which I want to keep. One is door of autonomy, terrain of struggle, and the file is regional. These are all important. But I'm going to go ahead and say I still stick to the long retreat thing. I think they've been in retreat since the 1970s, since Vietnam, since they effectively defaulted on gold then. And the analogy I return to is sort of the death of our own sun. When our sun dies some billion years hence, it will actually get bigger near the end and engulf the inner planets as it fuses basically worse and worse materials. And I think that's what the US empire is doing now. It had soft power. The soft power was good, but now it's forced to fuse heavier and heavier resources, heavier and heavier materials. So it outgasses a bit at the end, and it engulfs Europe. It engulfs Venezuela. It's trying to engulf Cuba. It can engulf Syria. It can engulf Libya. But these are not signs of strength. It had an order in the Middle East, which was based fundamentally on not using its Persian Gulf bases. And those were its gold standard bases. Those were its literally worth more than gold radars, and that was his Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain. That structure was based on soft power, and they had the Strait of Hormuz closed to Iran without firing a shot. But they had to fuse those sort of heavy elements because they're getting, because they're collapsing. And our sun ends in a white dwarf. It fuses heavier and heavier elements. It goes red. It kind of cooks the Earth and engulfs Mercury and Venus, but then it collapses into a white dwarf. So I think these are signs of collapse. There was an order before which benefited it without firing a shot, and it is consuming that order. So it may look like strength in the sense that it is preying on the weak, but that is not strength. And Iran is pushing back, Russia is pushing back, China is pushing back. It is getting, after World War II, as an empire, its goal was to take over the world. And now it is getting pushed back. So what Bikram Gill says is what's happening in Iran is not an anti-colonial war, because Iran wasn't colonized. America was unable to set foot in Iran. It's an anti-imperial war in the sense that they are being pushed back. And you can see that happening even with the attacks tonight. They're not attacking the UAE now. That's pretty much done. Now they're hitting Jordan. They weren't hitting Jordan before. And the security umbrella of Iran covered Iran. Now it's covering Lebanon. Let's say it's covering Beirut. And then almost within 24 hours, they said, no, it's covering all of Lebanon. So they're pushing the empire back. The empire can certainly react. They can counterattack. They can engage in petty terrorism even deep within Iran, deep within Russia, deep within wherever. But they're moving back. I think we're past Stalingrad. And as Benji says, I think we're at Bagration. And of course, the Nazis were the most dangerous at the end. They were burning every village and continuing their genocide until the last minute when you think maybe those resources should be spent somewhere else. And that is what this empire is doing. But I think
and they were retreating. They were retreating by saying they were still on the offensive on every front, right?
Yeah. I think that just as like progress towards revolution isn't linear, there may be strategic, withdrawals in order to, regroup, and you've learned from that thrust that, what you need, to be successful in the next. And so it's not a linear. Likewise, the retreat is not going to be linear. And this is something that I think as soon as people were starting to talk about the multipolar world, my view on it, and people were very excited about the idea of the multipolar world, no longer a US unipolar moment, I was saying, yes, but this is very hopeful in the sense that it opens up space for anti-imperialist organizing, possibilities for a new system. But in the meantime, this is a very dangerous period of history because, this the relinquishing of sole hegemonic power, the reality is not going to be matched immediately by the ideology. There's still the supremacist ideology, and that will lead to violent attacks, attempts to reconstitute it. And so it's going to be a very choppy, bumpy, violent, and chaotic sort of period as this transition, happens, even if we can see that materially speaking, the base from which, empire's power was generated has been weakened and is contracting and so forth. So I think it's possible very much to integrate both these perspectives, because when you look in a particular place at a particular time, you can see violent, aggressive, colonialist war. I mean, you still have, Marco Rubio fantastically speaking at the Munich conference about how we have to recolonize the world. I mean, this is an insane project. It's clearly delusional, but it's also something that, is there in the ideological matrix. And so they will try certain things, that will be very dangerous for the world. There will be a lot of brutality and a lot of suffering. And that is going to be a challenge for us to deal with. I mean, nobody wants to be, the Venus and, Earth and I forget what the closest one to the sun
Mercury,
is.
Mercury, Venus,
right
Earth,
there.
and Mars, yes.
That's right. Nobody wants to be there because you're going to get overwhelmed and burnt up. And this is unfortunately what is so painful in this moment of history, is to see the sacrificing essentially up to this point, potentially of Gaza, of Palestine, of the peoples of West Asia overall, as having to face and take up the confrontation. What we want, of course, is to protect these places that nobody should be having to be sacrificed for the death throes of this empire. And, if actually some other countries did more in, even in small ways, this could be, better outcome for the people of the world. And so that's what I kind of look at. What gives me a little bit of hope is the idea that despite the horrible loss that happened in Syria, Turkey seems now, for example, to recognize how dangerous their direct confrontation potentially with Israel is, because there's no buffer state of Syria as part of the axis of resistance. They now are face to face potentially with Israeli expansionism. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's both internal problems within Syria, the weakness of the Jolani kind of control over a very unmanageable situation is internal, but also the patrons, Qatar and Turkey, are kind of very concerned right now about the greater Israel project, and so they are not giving the green light to collaborate in the Lebanese state's attempt to disarm the resistance and send in the Jolani Wahhabi Takfiri death squads into northern Lebanon. I think they are acting in some respect to restrain that, because they don't want the resistance to just completely fall, and the buffer between them and Israeli expansion, which everybody is now learning is unrestrained. If it can take its neighbors, it will, and that there is a huge constituency in the imperial core that is happy for any aggression by Israel. When you have Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, basically saying, yeah, they should, if they can take, all that land, if they can take the Nile to the Euphrates, we should certainly not stand in their way, and we would accept that they do it. So I think that's a kind of important kind of point. But the one really dangerous thing, it seems to me, in this situation is, of course, that there is the most kind of irrational, if you want to put it in that terms, ideological, supremacist, fascistic polity in the mix that has nuclear weapons. So it seems to me, if we want a softer landing out of this situation, more attention needs to be made and discussed in the imperialist West and so on about the danger of Israel's nuclear weapons. I don't think the U.S. is going to use them. Like, when Trump said we can end civilizations and we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age, or we're going to destroy Iran as a civilization, essentially he was threatening something like nuclear cataclysm and nuclear war. But he backed off that. I don't think that's a genuine option in his calculation, but we can't say the same exactly about Israel in this circumstance. And, it's not that I'm like completely worried about that, but I think the reality of that choice and decision is coming up closer and closer strategically, because the Zionist entity is being weakened dramatically. It is clear. People are fleeing. They're going to Cyprus. So, it's got to have it's got an existential question. How is it going to be thinking about it? There are ways that, the rest of the world should really, be intervening and recognize that the best solution is take away, let's go for a nuclear-free zone in the whole region. Let's take away the Zionist entity's nuclear weapon. Right.
Well, let's take away the Zionist entity.
Then it collapses. If it doesn't have nuclear weapons, it collapses right away. It's gone. Like there's nothing left for it.
I disagree with that, because I think it's just, it's held up by the empire, because it's basically, again, a human centipede with the empire. So the nuclear weapons, I don't think make much of a difference. Like, what is really interesting is, the way Iran is prosecuting this war. And actually, as we're speaking, they've hit the which one is it? The Mufawak Salty airbase in Jordan, where they're parking apparently all their F-35s and F whatever else the others are that are actually proper planes, which the F-35 isn't. And at the same time, I think like 1.1 trillion was wiped off gold today. So those are the material realities of this war. And I don't think the Zionist entity will fire nuclear weapons. There's been a bit of
I didn't say that I thought they would.
Yeah.
I would say that it's a strategic, political orienting goal. It should be to deprive them of it, just the way that South Africa.
Yeah, like when the USSR collapsed, that was like a major point of securing nuclear weapons. Yeah,
that's right.
But, yeah, you're right. But I mean, South Africa wasn't denuclearized before it was brought down, and it wasn't brought down actually as much as it should have been. But I'm not sure. Maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were saying we should make this a focus. I don't think we should, because it just, it demoralizes. It brings fear to people.
Demoralize anybody. We're going to take them away. That's what we should.
Well, that's fine.
But Seymour Hersh, like today is, he's basically an intelligence toilet now. But he's reporting that Trump is talking about it.
Well, there you go. Okay, this is a healthy.
What is it? What is he talking about? It. Sorry.
Let me dig that up. So he was basically they're talking about potential use of nuclear weapons, but Seymour Hersh just repeats whatever some intelligence person is telling him. I'll dig that up.
Yeah, there was this story that he asked for the cause a couple of weeks back, and they wouldn't give them to him or whatever. And it's
I can read you the quote. It said it was amid what could be called a what-to-do meeting that a frustrated and angry Trump, perhaps only thinking out loud, raised the issue of using low-yield nuclear weapons to destroy some of Iran's underground missile factories. I was told, just the way they talk is hilarious, I was told by someone with extensive knowledge of nuclear weapon that it was a very scary and very serious moment. This is like my child drinking out of a glass or something. The president was depicted at this point to be desperate not to lose in Iran. And his idea was to warn the Iranian leadership that we're very seriously considering such an escalation.
I think actually this is this is the U.S. ruling class taking pot shots at one another. It's just a bunch of psychological.
I think so, but I mean, if you think about it, this green strip behind myself, this is where everything started, and it has been completely cleared out. Like what I'm trying to say is that, it is Stalingrad, but it is also set a standard to what they've been able to do. And we should never let them go completely confident with what they did to Gaza, because they literally, burned it to the ground. I know that the resistance is still there. I know there is life, and I know that people are resistant and everything. But, the atrocity that they were allowed to do, we shouldn't let them. We need to bring it back constantly, basically, because, and I'm going to be straightforward. This has a lot to do with the fact that, you were mentioning South Africa before. This has a lot to do that the people who are sitting in the Zionist entity are Jewish. And the fact that, we are not allowed to talk about this from a Western perspective in the way we would want to do this, because there is all this clout of, look what they did to them. And somehow they can be harmed up to their teeth. They can be as savage as they want. Why? Because they're Jewish. But I mean, this has to incrementally shift in the West, especially, because I'm telling you, the South of the world knows this, because it's imperialism, it's colonialism. It doesn't come, it can come through Christianity or Judaism. They don't have the Holocaust because the Europeans did this. So they have especially for people who are sitting in Europe and in the United States, we know exactly that we are going to have to face this question of Jewish and Judaism, which, by the way, and you know this very well, the right wing in the United States is taking on this question, even if it's in the wrong direction with anti-Semitism and all that. They are doing that much more than the left is capable of doing. And we need to start, why is this happening? When are we going to confront this in a productive manner?
Well, and
Matteo doing my rant tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, these are very good points. Very good ones.
What's interesting about that point, though, Matteo, that connects back to the nuclear question, is it is only the right wing that has been making an issue out of Israel's nuclear weapons. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, whenever she criticizes Israel, she describes it as nuclear armed Israel. Like almost no politician ever says that Israel has a nuclear weapon, right? They never admit it, they never discuss it, etc. And so
they just low-yield nuked.
He started talking about Jews, man. They pulled him immediately. Don't watch it, guys.
From this, but my point here is that's a very sensitive, kind of issue, and the right wing that has been able to confront Israel much more profoundly and directly in terms of the aggressive language about, trying to, of course, they do it in such a facetious way that is to whitewash U.S. empire, right? As if U.S. empire, if left to its own devices, take away this terrible Zionist lobby that is exercising this influence over us, we would be nice people, we could get along with the world. It's a total, kind of fantasy, but they are capable of also saying, hey, listen, they have this huge military industrial complex that we've given them. They have nuclear weapons. And in fact, actually, it is a question mark. Why does somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene always mention that it's a nuclear armed Israel? That's interesting. It does a certain kind of political work. She may not even be conscious of it. That would be an interesting question. Why does she?
No, and I think people underestimate how much on the right the belief system is based on bringing the end of the world. Like Israel is supposed to exist to bring the end of the world closer. People actually believe that. I guess Matteo's been nuked, but he made some good points about not forgetting Gaza, not forgetting the devastation going on. When we talk to Ehsan Safarinejad, or any Iranian really, they're much more conservative because they pay the price, and they're like, we're facing the greatest military in the world. I try to dismiss the U.S. military, but he's the one facing it, and they say, no, we pay great costs for that, and they behave. So people like us who are like, just go faster, like end the empire. The ones who are actually fighting it are, if you talk to them, they're much more conservative, they're much more cautious, and they do not underestimate the enemy as Matteo is saying that we should, which is correct.
Yeah, they can't
afford to.
Yeah, that's right.
And what he said about like the Jewish thing. So like, look, I think that's changed in my head. I think
it's changing quite a bit. Yes.
Yeah, I'm back at like the original Hamas charter in my head now. So I think that's changing globally.
Yeah. Benji, you're muted. Were you trying?
I am muted. I was speaking to brother Matteo on WeChat. Where of course China is offering us safe channels of communication. So I have to inform you that because Matteo named one particular religion that we are not supposed to name in the West, he was removed from all possibility to further talk with us.
But he made a good point that like in the South, like we don't have the same baggage. Like I didn't do the Holocaust, man. Like it's just, we don't know the anti-Semitic stuff from like Europe from like 200 years ago, but we do see what Jews are doing now in the name of a Jewish state, and like I think people don't like it. You can say that. You can say like Sinhalese people do something. You can say, I don't know, Americans do something. You can say Jews are doing something.
But where they're right, where Milikovsky is right, is they are actually defending Western so-called civilization.
He's absolutely right. He's absolutely.
They are the spearhead of Western so-called civilization, i.e., genocidal, rapey, perverted, hypocritical, and sanctimonious bunch of lowlifes.
It reminds me, in fact, because he's been saying it for a long time. It reminds me of his first public statements that he made in U.S. media after 9/11. Okay, because initially there was this like, why do
you mean after he finished dancing because the operation had done his work?
They're like, everybody in the United States is asking like, well, why do they hate us? And like that was a sincere question in many respects, in many quarters. They were actually curious to learn, and they were learning, that first I can't remember on what program we talked about that first videotape that got sent. Maybe it was on a different program, but that first videotape from Al-Qaeda, right? That's how it was sent. It was sent to Al Jazeera on videotape, through a little special courier. And on that first videotape,
all the way from Langley.
Yeah, well, Osama bin Laden was saying basically, you would not have known that he was like a Muslim so-called fundamentalist. I mean, his rationale was, hey, you've got bases in our lands. Look what you did to Iraq with sanctions. People are dying there. And look what's happened. The oppression of the Palestinians. And he said, in terms of this kind of terrorism and civilian casualties, he said, well, what you did Hiroshima. Right. So it was like a purely political kind of analysis that, he was saying. But many people in the United States were like, well, if this is happening to us because of our support for Israel, maybe we got to think about this. And that was, again, one of these moments where you've got this kind of right-wing American naivete about its own empire, thinking, hey, maybe this is only happening because of our support for Israel. And otherwise, we'd be good guys. We'd be well liked in the world. Netanyahu came on and he said, now you are experiencing what we have been experiencing on your behalf. We've been fighting them, these terrible Muslims, we've been defending Western civilization for you. Now you understand. So you better support us and help us, right? So he tried to flip this whole kind of questioning from a kind of narrow strategic interest into this broader civilizational unity. He's been doing that game, for his entire career, right? And he is actually correct when he says that.
Yeah. Well, after all, it makes sense that you would want, value for your false flag money. But I have a little 9/11 story. I was living in the Netherlands at the time, and I had already gone off mainstream media for a few years, I think since 95 or something. And a friend called me and said, have you heard what happened? I said, no, what happened? Well, there was a terrorist attack in New York and the World Trade Center, blah, blah, blah. It's incredible. And I said, oh, no, the only thing that's incredible is that it doesn't happen every week in the US, everywhere. That's the thing that really completely floors me. So that was my reaction the first time I heard it.
I remember my reaction.
I wasn't connected to Mileikowski, of course.
But I remember I was walking down Rue Sherbrooke in Montreal, and my friend ran up to me, who's actually, I think he actually served in the IDF. But he said that the Twin Towers had been hit. And I was like, oh, in Israel? And that was like my first thought. I was like 18. That wasn't like super politically conscious or anything. But I just remember that was my first thought. Like even in my head, like unconsciously, they were connected.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, at any rate, I think basically we've been in this kind of, okay, everybody bingo cards out in this long Crusader war, and one phase of it that opened up in a much more obvious and open phase of clearly started with the global war on terror. And, George Bush even said, let's let slip. And then the difference is that at the time he said it, he had to kind of apologize for it and correct it. Like when he said, this crusade, he called that this crusade would be a long war, right? It wasn't going to be just a kind of short-term occupation or score settling with some Taliban in like Afghanistan. This was going to be a long conflict, and he characterized it as a crusade. And then he received criticism and realized that this wasn't going to be convenient for recruiting, Muslim vassal allies to the, kind of cause. And so he reformed that. And in fact, actually, if you look on the White House speech, I think they changed the word, made it like a mission or something like that. The difference is now, if you call it a crusade, it's okay. Like, it'll be okay if you say that.
Yeah, Pete Hegseth has the Crusader tattoo.
Many people who are saying it and doing it and have the tattoos to prove it and, are really conscious about this being a crusade. And even the, Pahlavi, kind of pretender, Prince Reza, in that kind of spoof that these pranksters from Germany did about ahead of the start of the attack about, mobilizing, and maybe, Germany might be willing and interested to join the effort, and were as if they were there to negotiate.
Yeah, I think they said their name was Adolf, but yeah.
They did. I know. He did not pick. I don't know. Maybe something flashed across his mind at that moment. I don't know. But he said, it would be wonderful to have Germany join the crusade. He's not had to say, that was an inopportune, kind of, statement. I didn't really mean it as a religious war. No, they're rather comfortable with it, both in Israel and outside, of characterizing this now as religious war. Right. And isn't that what's being kind of like, passed through the Knesset now, is basically like, let's sanctify this whole thing and really drape it in the trappings of religious war. So that's where we are.
Should we hear from Nasrallah on the way out? Because could you put up the 92 statement?
Yeah.
He's
this one.
So it's okay. So we can do this one. This is 2023.
The other one. Let's do 92. Okay, there we go.
This is just to show that. I'll end it with a Quran verse as well. But so he says the long-term strategy of the Islamic resistance is clear and does not require additional explanation. It involves fighting against Israel and liberating Jerusalem, as well as Imam Khomeini's proposal, namely ending Israel as a state. He says, we are not unrealistic. We do not pretend our military capabilities, the numbers of our mujahideen, will be enough to regain Jerusalem. None of us has ever made that claim. We do, however, believe the resistance has to finish the job it started. It is impossible for us to fight the Israeli enemy through traditional and classical methods, but rather we fight through a war of attrition, whereby we drain its energy, weaken it, and then one day force it to withdraw. And if you pull up the 2023, at that point he's talking about Lebanon, which they succeeded in. They got it to withdraw. This is in 2023 after the flood, and he's talking about expanding this. He says, as the horizons looming to our fellow Palestinian people and resistance fighters, I say, since the creation of the resistance fighter following the creation of the Israeli Zionist regime, we've been fighting a war of fortitude. We haven't reached a knockout victory, which is what Matteo talked about when winning on points. We still need to be more realistic. We are winning victory by points, not a knockout victory. This is what happened in 2002, 2006 in Lebanon. This is what happened with the Gazans and similar resistance fighters, West Bank, Iraq, Afghanistan. Fortitude, patience, bravery. This is what we have, and this is our strength. This is what the enemy lacks. This is what the enemy wants. And to me, this ties back to a Quran verse that they say, that Hezbollah at least says over every martyr, which is, among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with Allah. Some of them have fulfilled their vow, and some are still waiting, and they have not changed in the least. I can read Nasrallah from 82 to 2023, and he's saying the same thing. So when we talk about what happened yesterday in Iraq, or even a week ago in Iran, or even a week ago, or even a month ago, these guys are thinking in decades. And to return to Hamas, like Sheikh Yassin said, he made a Quranic prediction based on 40-year generations, and he said that Israel would be gone by 2027. He said that after, the Nakba, Intifada, then you have armed resistance, then you have victory. And it's not based on what happened yesterday, right? It's based, and even from the imperial side, as you said, they were talking about the Crusades in 2004. Even from then, that's when the die was cast. Trump is just the guy shutting down the casino, which is what Trump specializes in, is demolishing casinos.
I think.
Go ahead, Benji.
Adnan, I'm totally won over by your concept of the crusading society. I think white empire is true and true a crusading society. It always has been, and it will be until a stake is driven through its heart. It was crusading against the Bolshevik Revolution at the moment the revolution happened. It's how many nations joined that particular crusade. It's been crusading all the time. So I think the crusade, sure, but it's the crusading society. It's this very particular form of and it's always been transnational in a way, that and the theology of it is always kind of secondhand BS. But the use of it, the function of it is very clear, and it's genociding people in faraway lands for the simple, sin of daring to be there and to live in different ways, and as a way to try and amass some stuff, and also, to release the pressure on our shithole countries, basically, is what it's about. And so I think this is a very important point. And we people from the West, from the right, we are signs of a crusading society. And it really needs to be put out of everybody else's misery, and also of its own misery, because, it doesn't make for very happy living when all you have to look forward to is to go and crack skulls and rape people and pillage and stuff. It gets old quite quickly, and after 500 years gets more than old. And by the way, things are accelerating, and brother Bola in the comments is saying, is advising Jewish squatters in occupied Palestine to sell their Tel Aviv condos post haste. And they says it's weird that we haven't seen.
Have you watched that video? Okay.
Real estate prices in the occupied colony, because that's that if that bubble hasn't burst, that's one bubble that's gonna burst soon enough. I've got a couple of videos to conclude.
Yeah, we should.
So the first one, I don't know. Anyway, so the first one is, and I think both of them, they're both from our friends at Explosive Media, and both of them show exactly the state of play. So the first one is basically Comrade Trump in his current predicament. And the second one is what Iran is doing meanwhile, as it prosecutes that attrition war that it has been planning for so long. Hassan reminded us, that I think it was Salami, who's now become a martyr, but was one of the chief of the IRGC Aerospace Force. I hope I'm not, mistaking his function. But there's this video, and I saw it. It was in the late 80s or mid 90s, where it was literally lecturing IRGC cadets as to exactly how to fight this enemy. And what it was saying then is what we're seeing now. So those are very, very adept chess players. So let's see how they play their. They move their pawns on the narrative warfare chessboard. Can you play video number one now, brother Adnan?
Which one is the?
So can you see? It's the one with the Trump figure. The one with the figure.
Okay.
The second.
I'm not sure if I have the Explosive Media videos. You posted some other videos.
You have the two videos I just posted now on in the StreamYard.
Oh, they're in the StreamYard. Okay. Sorry. I was looking in the wrong place. Okay, so which ones?
So the one, can you see the figure?
This one is the first.
No, this is the second one. Stop it.
Oh, okay. That's the second one? Okay, so this is the first one.
Yes.
I want to get the backstory on his hand. His hand is always bandaged.
That's
So
that
we-
one. This one.
So you see, basically, Comrade Trump is a prisoner of the situation, and is a prisoner of, in his compulsion. So is of course trapped in his compulsion repetition to claim the deal is closed, the victory has been achieved and everything, and it's like Groundhog Day for Comrade Trump.
Okay.
If you'd order the deal, that's how he operates as well. Like in business, he would always just be like announcing stuff before it happened to just get started.
Yeah, but it used to get him somewhere, whereas now it's kind of running on empty. It's like the rubber doesn't hit the road, so he keeps on announcing, but nothing much happens.
Yeah.
Of strategic
Here's
importance.
this one.
So this is what happened. They opened an anti-cancer institute. And this is part of the reason they use nuclear research. It's for medicine.
Mm-hmm. Well, even the nuclear it's been clear that there are a lot of medical treatments that can come from, really studying radioactivity and so on. There's agricultural uses, and you have to enrich uranium above this 3.25% that had been the discussed threshold since the JCPOA. You have to have 10 or 15 or 20% for some of these applications and uses. But there's a lot of medical technologies that are developed using nuclear radiation and
Iran's a leader in that.
And they are.
But we live in this topsy-turvy world where the only people to use nukes on civilians are the ones who dictate who gets to use them or not. And the only ones who sort of murder children in hospitals and bomb water facilities are the ones who dictate what terrorism is. So, I mean, hopefully Iran is rewriting that.
We used to dictate. Yeah, they're rewriting, and they've now got Trump in a chokehold. Like, he can't leave the scene anymore, and he's condemned to repeating his one, and the deal is closed. And that's
I think they're caught in decisions of decades past, like all the players really. So, but the difference is that Iran has prepared. Iran has prepared for this. They prepared for long. They've said they're prepared for 20 years. And just culturally, politically, their people are with them. And that's the fundamental difference, which I think it'll come down to, is the people of the empire are not with them. But the people of Iran are with this. In fact, the people of Iran are probably ahead of the IRGC in terms of what they want to do.
Isn't that what Clausewitz was saying, that the third factor of war, that you need to have the population behind you?
Right. And that's, of course, an article or a principle, foundational one of guerrilla war, insurgent war against colonialism, is that you have to be, basically among the people and with the people. And people's war is what we've been witnessing here. I think you're absolutely right, Benji, that in many ways, the sentiment of at least of the people who are out there nightly demonstrating are, even ahead of the IRGC in some respects, and more dangerous to morale in Iran are these negotiations being attenuated with the economic blockade having possible effects. That hybrid war is much more dangerous for the morale and the integrity. That psychological war, etc., that has to be constantly combated. And that's why in the most recent communication from Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, he talked about the hybrid war and the importance of unity. In some sense, the impatience and the sort of deranged, as you were saying, that they can't help themselves, nature of U.S. and Israeli militarism actually plays into the hands of rallying the population of Iran around its government and in resistance, right? So open war attacks and these bombardments, attacking the, water treatment facilities in Hormuz, I forget the name of the province, but in the south, of the country, which they apparently are already repairing. And I saw some report, somebody posted that Al Jazeera English is reporting that water service has been restored in those, in those locations already after just a couple of days. But that open attack upon civilian infrastructure, I mean, one of the most impressive periods of solidarity and defiance among the people of Iran was, of course, when there was bombing of the bridges and the people went, and camped out on the bridges, So, we are seeing something truly remarkable, and the logics that the Western kind of calculations might have are in fact actually the opposite of what is being demonstrated on reality. Like their expectations: kill their leaders, attack their infrastructure, that'll demoralize them and they'll rise up and throw off their government. The exact opposite, of course, has been happening. And so that's the state of play where we are today. Thank you, everyone, for participating on a great stream. Again, the 20th edition, White Hawk Down, of the Axis of Resistance versus the Axis of Epstein. And, we have to thank also Matteo for being with us as long as he was able. He was here and shared his insights, and we really appreciate it. We will thank him. And of course, we all thank you for being here, being part of the chat, building this community for solidarity in anti-imperialist struggle, fighting the information war. And I just want to remind people, give to Dahnoon Mutual Aid. I've been posting it in the chat frequently, and you can find it. Even if you don't have an Instagram account, you can find that page and use the links that are posted there to get to their chuffed donation page. So please be generous, and don't forget them. Don't forget Gaza. As Matteo was very eloquent in pointing out, the devastation that they have suffered cannot be ignored, and is not a sideline to the more kinetic and dramatic events geopolitically of the Ramadan war, but they are actually, in fact, possibly you could say, the reason why this whole conflict and this whole war has taken the shape that it has. So don't forget Palestine. Never forget Palestine. So I want to thank you all. Peace with solidarity and justice for all.
And free Palestine and swift victory to the free people of the world.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.